Here's an uncomfortable truth that transmission shops absolutely do not want you to know. A automatic transmission rebuild costs somewhere between $3,000 and $5,000, sometimes more, and the majority of the transmissions that land on a shop floor didn't fail because of a manufacturing defect or bad luck or because the car gods decided it was your turn. They failed because of a small handful of completely avoidable habits that the owner never even knew were slowly killing it. Today, I'm counting down the mistakes that destroy automatic transmissions, why each one does the damage it does, and exactly what to do instead. Mistake 1: never changing the fluid because someone told you it was filled for life. This is the single most destructive transmission myth in circulation today, and it costs people thousands of dollars a year because it sounds so reasonable when a salesperson says it. Lifetime fluid. It sounds great. It sounds like the engineers solved the problem. Here's the translation nobody gives you at the dealership. Lifetime, in that context, often means the lifetime of the warranty, not the lifetime of the car, not the lifetime of your transmission. The warranty, which for a lot of vehicles is somewhere around 5 years or 60,000 miles. After that, you're on your own. And the fluid that was quote unquote filled for life is still in there, slowly turning into something that looks and smells like used motor oil left in a fire. Here's the chemistry. Automatic transmission fluid does 3 jobs simultaneously. It lubricates the moving parts. It transfers hydraulic pressure to shift the gears, and it cools the whole system. It is doing an enormous amount of work. And heat, which is everywhere inside a transmission, breaks it down over time. The additives that keep the fluid protecting instead of destroying get used up. And once they're gone, the fluid stops being a lubricant and starts being an abrasive. The real number most transmission specialists and manufacturers who are being honest with you settle on is somewhere in the range of 30 to 60,000 miles for the fluid change, depending on how hard the car works. Stop and go traffic, towing, hilly driving, hot climates, all of these put you in the harder end of that range. A fluid change costs somewhere between $80 and $200 depending on your car. A transmission rebuild costs somewhere between $3,000 and $5,000. That math is not complicated. One caution worth repeating here because it matters. If you have a high mileage transmission that has genuinely never had its fluid changed, don't go straight to an aggressive flush. Talk to a mechanic you trust about a gentle drain and fill approach instead, because shocking a neglected gearbox with a sodium pressure flush can disturb debris that was sitting harmlessly and cause its own problems. Slow and steady wins that race. Change the fluid. Ignore the lifetime label. Your transmission will thank you by not leaving you stranded on a highway at 6 in the evening on a Friday. Not that I'm speaking from experience or anything. Mistake 2. Shifting into drive before the car finishes rolling backward. This one is so common that most people doing it have no idea it's even a thing. And I get it, because from the driver's seat, it feels like nothing. You're in reverse, you've backed out of the driveway, the car is still rolling gently backward, and you flick it into drive before it fully stops because you're in a hurry. And what's the difference, right? The difference is inside your transmission, where a component called the output shaft is spinning in one direction, and you've just asked it to reverse that spin immediately, and the transmission is the thing that has to absorb that conflict. Every single time you do this, the clutch packs and bands inside the transmission take a mechanical shock. They were not designed to take. None of these shocks are catastrophic on their own. That's the sneaky part. It feels fine. The car does what you asked, but you are micro damaging those components every single morning in the driveway, and micro damage stacks up. Over years, over tens of thousands of those small jolts, you are grinding your transmission apart, one reversing driveway at a time. The fix is genuinely free and takes about 2 additional seconds. Come to a complete stop, full stop, zero movement before you shift direction. That's it. That's the whole habit. The transmission was designed to handle direction changes from a stationary position. It was not designed to handle them from a rolling one. Stop first, then shift. Every time, mistake 3, towing or hauling without knowing your actual limits. Let's talk about the boat ramp, because the boat ramp is where transmissions go to die, and nobody there will tell you that. Towing is one of the fastest ways to destroy a transmission, and the reason comes back to the same word we keep returning to in this video: heat. Everything about pulling a heavy load creates heat inside your transmission. The fluid runs hotter. The cooling system works harder. And if you're anywhere near your towing capacity, doing it in hot weather, climbing hills, or sitting in traffic with a trailer attached, you are cooking that fluid faster than the system can shed it. The transmission doesn't complain. It just quietly absorbs the heat until one day it doesn't. Here's the part that surprises most people. Your towing capacity isn't a conservative number. The engineers padded to protect themselves legally. It's not a suggestion. It's the actual calculated limit of your cooling system, your transmission, your brakes, and your hitch, all working together at the edge of what they can handle. Exceed it, and nothing flashes or beeps. You just get heat. Sustained, invisible, damaging heat every mile of the trip. And here's where I have to be honest about something people get wrong constantly. Your tow rating lives in your owner's manual. That's the only place it lives. Not on a form. Not from a guy at the boat ramp who says his cousin has the same truck and pulls twice, that no problem. His cousin's transmission is also on borrowed time. Find the number, know the number, stay under the number. If towing is a regular part of your life, or even an occasional one, the single smartest upgrade you can make is an auxiliary transmission cooler. It's a small, additional radiator that mounts in front of your existing cooling system and bleeds heat out of the transmission fluid before it builds to damaging levels. Relative to what a transmission rebuild costs, it's cheap. Relative to what it protects, it's one of the best investments in the whole car. Tow within your limits, add a cooler if you tow regularly, and maybe leave the boat ramp debates to people whose transmissions are already paid off. Mistake 4. Sitting in park, idling for 10 minutes to warm the car up because someone's grandfather told them to. I'm not going to make fun of whoever told you this. It was probably your dad, or your grandfather, or some well-meaning uncle who spent 30 years working on cars and genuinely knew what he was talking about. The problem isn't that they were wrong. The problem is that they were right about a completely different category of vehicle that hasn't been sold in this country since roughly 1983. Carbureted engines, the kind that ruled the road before fuel injection took over, genuinely needed a warm-up period. The carburetor mixed fuel and air mechanically, and in cold temperatures, It got that mixture wrong in ways that made the engine stumble and stall unless you let it sit. So you let it sit. And the habit stuck. And then fuel injection arrived and solved that problem entirely. And nobody sent the memo to the guy in the driveway. Here's what actually happens inside your transmission during a long cold idle. The fluid warms up very slowly, painfully slowly, because the thing that actually brings transmission fluid up to operating temperature isn't time, it's load. It's the mechanical work of the transmission doing its job under gentle driving conditions that generates the heat needed to bring the fluid up to the temperature where it flows properly and protects the way it's supposed to. Sitting in park with the engine ticking over does almost nothing to accelerate that process. You are just burning fuel and annoying your neighbors. And here's the part that matters mechanically. Cold transmission fluid is thick. It doesn't flow through the narrow hydraulic passages inside the valve body as freely as warm fluid does. The longer your transmission sits in that cold, thick fluid state, without a load of actual driving to warm it properly, the longer it's operating below its best. Long idling isn't protecting it. It's just delaying the warm-up while achieving nothing. 30 seconds. That's all. 30 seconds of idle is enough for oil pressure to stabilize in the engine, and then you drive away gently. Easy throttle, no hard acceleration. No aggressive lane changes for the first few minutes, while everything comes up to temperature properly through actual use. You'll warm up faster, you'll protect the transmission better, and your neighbors can enjoy their morning in peace. Everybody wins. Mistake 5. Riding the brake all the way down a long hill instead of using engine braking. This one surprises people because braking feels like it has nothing to do with your transmission. But here's the connection. When you ride the brake down a long descent, your transmission is sitting in drive at whatever gear it's selected at the top of the hill, which is usually a high gear because you were moving fast. The engine is barely doing anything. All the work of slowing the car is going into your brakes, which heat up. And the transmission, which is still working to transfer power and maintain speed control, is also heating up because a car descending a hill at speed still puts load through the drivetrain. The smarter approach is to use a lower gear manually, either with the gear selector or with paddle shifters, if you have them, before you start the descent. A lower gear means the engine is doing the braking work through what's called compression braking, the mechanical resistance of the engine itself slowing the car down. This bleeds speed off the descent without hammering your brakes and without allowing the transmission to sit in an overloaded high gear the whole way down. Your brakes last longer, your transmission runs cooler, and you have more control on the way down. There is genuinely no downside to this. If you've never used the engine braking deliberately, the next time you're about to go down a long hill, try dropping one gear before you start and feel the difference. Mistake 6. Ignoring a small transmission fluid leak because it's only a few drops. Here's a reframe that might change how you think about this forever. A transmission fluid leak isn't a cosmetic problem. It isn't a minor inconvenience. It isn't something to keep an eye on. It is your transmission slowly bleeding out the fluid that lubricates it, cools it, and controls every single shift it makes. Every drop on your driveway is a drop that is no longer inside the system doing its job. And the system has no way to make more. It just has less and less until it doesn't have enough. The cruel part is how quiet the warning signs are. A transmission running low on fluid doesn't pull over and explain the situation to you. It shifts a little slowly, it hesitates between gears, it shudders on a cold morning in a way that feels almost dismissible. And because none of that is dramatic, most people dismiss it. They figure it's just the car being a car. And then one day, usually on a road you don't want to be stranded on, it stops shifting altogether because you ran it low for long enough that the internal components were running without adequate lubrication, and the damage accumulated quietly until it was done. Now, here is the part that should genuinely bother you, because it bothers me every time I think about it. In the vast majority of cases, a transmission fluid leak is a cheap repair when you catch it early. A leaking pan gasket, a worn output shaft seal, a loose cooler line fitting that needs tightening, or a new clamp. These are not complicated or expensive repairs. Depending on where the leak is coming from, you're often looking at somewhere between $50 and a few $100. A straightforward job for any competent mechanic. Ignore it until the transmission itself is damaged from running low. And now you're talking about a rebuild, $3,000 to $5,000, possibly more depending on the vehicle, for a problem you could see with your own eyes on your own driveway every single morning while you backed out to go get coffee. So here's what I want you to do right now. Go look at where your car normally parks. If you see red or pinkish fluid, that is transmission fluid. Not next week. Not after the weekend. Today. Small leak, small bill, or ignored leak, enormous bill. That is the only choice on the table. Mistake 7. Putting it in park on a slope without setting the handbrake first. We touched on this in a general car habits context before, but it's worth going deeper here because most people genuinely have no idea what happens inside the transmission when they skip this step. When you shift into park, a small metal pin called the parking pole drops into a notch on a gear inside the transmission. That pole is what holds your car stationary. It's a small part carrying a big job, and when you park on any kind of slope without a handbrake set, the full weight of the car is pressing against that pole through the drivetrain. Every minute you're parked is being held by that one small pin under load. Over years of this, the pole wears. The notch it sits in wears. And one day you shift out of park and hear a clunk, or worse, you shift into park on a hill and nothing holds. Parking pole replacement or transmission work related to it is not a fun bill. The correct order of operations is simple. Stop the car completely. Set the handbrake. Then shift into park. In that order. When you do it that way, the handbrake holds the car on the slope and the parking pole drops in under no load at all. It's just a backup, the way it was designed to be used. 3 seconds of habit. Years of protection. Easy math. Mistake 8, flooring it from a cold start because the road is empty and it feels good. Look, I understand the temptation. Early morning, empty road, fresh tank of gas. But here is what's happening inside your transmission in those first few minutes of driving that should give you pause. Transmission fluid, like engine oil, is thicker when cold. It doesn't flow through the narrow passages and valves inside your transmission as freely as it does at operating temperature. The hydraulic pressure that controls your shifts isn't where it needs to be yet. The clutch packs are working under less than ideal lubrication. Everything inside a cold transmission is operating in a slightly compromised state. When you floor it from cold, you are putting maximum load through a system that is not ready for it. You're asking the clutch packs to handle hard acceleration when the fluid protecting them is still thick and sluggish and not fully circulating. The wear that happens in those moments is disproportionate to how the transmission feels from the driver's seat, because it feels completely fine, but it isn't. Gentle acceleration for the first few minutes. That's the ask. Not 10 minutes of crawling, not treating the car like it's made of glass. Just easy throttle while everything comes up to temperature. Then drive it however you like. The habit that ties all of this together. If you look back at everything on this list, almost every single mistake has one thing in common underneath it: heat. Fluid that's too old to manage heat properly. Mechanical shock that generates heat. Towing beyond the cooling system's ability to manage heat. Cold fluid that isn't ready to handle the heat of hard driving. Descents that cook the fluid through sustained load. Leaks that leave the system without enough fluid to absorb and dissipate heat. Heat is what destroys automatic transmissions. And the antidote to almost all of it is the same. Change the fluid on a real interval, drive smoothly, especially when cold. Know your towing limits, use engine braking on descents, fix leaks immediately, use the handbrake, and pay attention. None of this is expensive. Most of it is free. And a transmission that gets these basics right will outlast one that doesn't by a very, very wide margin. So, there they are, the mistakes that quietly destroy automatic transmissions while the driver assumes everything is fine because the car still moves. The ignored fluid, the rolling direction change, the unchecked leak, the cold, hard acceleration, the parking Paul, taking all the load every single day. None of them announce themselves. All of them are completely preventable. A transmission is one of the most complex and expensive components in your entire car. It deserves about 5 minutes of thought and a fluid change every 30 to 60,000 miles. That's not much to ask for something that would cost you $4,000 to replace. If even one of these saves you that bill, subscribe and drop your current mileage in the comments. I want to know how far your transmission has made it. And don't miss the next one, because we're getting into the cooling system mistakes that quietly lead to overheating, and the checks so simple that people always feel a little embarrassed they hadn't thought of them sooner. Change the fluid. Stop before you shift. Fix the leak. Drive it smooth. That's how transmissions survive long enough to become someone else's problem.